Greetings, scholars, for our AP Euro review for Unit 7. I'm looking at a review sheet here, and the topic here is a bunch of isms, basically, within the context, of course, of post-Napoleonic history: conservatism, liberalism, nationalism, socialism, feminism, industrialism, romanticism, and Marxism, sort of a subset of socialism. Anyhow, from top to bottom here, the Congress of Vienna. What was it? It was a meeting of the victors over Napoleon in 1815. It met in Vienna. It was hosted by Austrian statesman Clemens von Metternich. And the goal here is to establish a long-term peace. The goals are legitimacy and balance of power, the suppression of liberalism and nationalism and republicanism and revolution, anything that would create a new French Revolution. You don't want disruption. You want to keep the peace. And this was largely successful. Big picture for almost a century up until World War I, with some notable exceptions, such as the Franco-Prussian War and the Crimean War. But the victors here met periodically in what was called the Concert of Europe. And it's a series of meetings after 1815 for the purposes of conferring for what to do to keep the peace. And the victors are, you should know who the victor countries are: Austria, Prussia, Russia, Great Britain, and later, with the legitimacy of the Bourbon dynasty reinstated in France, you have Louis XVIII. That's the fifth member of the Concert of Europe. The Carlsbad Decrees, these were a series of restrictions on the German states involving the banning of a nationalist student group called the Burschenschaften, and the goal here is to suppress German liberalism, German nationalism certainly, to remove liberal profs, to threaten middle-class students with being ejected from professional programs in universities, and there's censorship in the German states. And the nation that's, I think, most similar to Germany in this post-Napoleonic time period is Italy. Now, Germany and Italy are more concepts here. They're certainly not a united political unity at this time, thus the issue of nationalism in both areas. What were the revolutions of 1848, and were they successful? The revolutions of 1848 occurred all over Europe, in France and in Austria, in Vienna, and in Hungary, in Italy, and they are a series of liberal and nationalist rebellions against the status quo, against this conservative political system. And the short answer here is they were not successful. All of these revolutions were suppressed within a year. The attempt to unify Germany failed. The rebellion in Vienna was crushed. The Hungarians are eventually defeated by a Russian army that will come to the aid of the Austrian emperor. The Italian revolutions are also suppressed, with the exception of Piedmont, which does set up a liberal constitution in northern Italy. The 1848 Frankfurt Parliament was a meeting of the German states to discuss whether or not to unite. And they offered a crown to the Prussian king, William IV, and his response was an emphatic no. He was not going to take a crown offered to him from the gutter. He does not want to be beholden to anyone else, and he feels that it's really beneath him to take it from what he sees as sort of a parliamentary riffraff. In this meeting, you have a discussion, an argument whether Germany should be the Grossdeutsch or the Kleinstdeutsch path. The Grossdeutsch would include Austria as a German state. The Kleinstdeutsch would be no Austria. And Austria decides not to join this argument for a united Germany, so it becomes a moot point here. And eventually, when Germany is formed, it will be without Austria. Austria certainly does not want to share power with Prussia. And Austria at this time is predominantly Catholic, and Prussia, northern Germany, is predominantly Lutheran. So there is a bit of a religious concern here as well. Giuseppe Mazzini is a nationalist leader in Italy, and his movement is called Young Italy. And this is an attempt to create an Italian republic without a king in 1831. France after Napoleon, Louis XVIII is put on the throne of France after the defeat of Napoleon, and he is a conservative, although there is a legislature. It's a limited legislature by the wealthy, which is going to lead to rebellion later. Charles X is going to take over after Louis XVIII dies, and he is not just a conservative, he is a reactionary. He wants to dial back the clock. He is going to ultimately dissolve the legislature and hold new elections because they're not too conservative enough to his liking. He's going to grant indemnities to aristocrats who've lost their property during the French Revolution. He restores primogeniture. He passes a law punishing sacrilege against the church, and he censors the press. And these are called the July Ordinances, and he is going to be faced with a revolution in 1830, which is going to evict him. He's going to be tossed out. He's going to flee to London, and a different branch of the Bonaparte family, the Orleanists, are going to come to power under Louis Philippe. And he fancies himself, he calls himself the bourgeois monarch. Outward appearance is one of simplicity. He wears a suit, not the king's regalia. But he is going to establish a government which continues to be governed by the wealthy, only this time the wealthy bourgeoisie. It's going to be a very limited government as well. He is going to be chased out in the Revolution of 1848, later to be replaced by Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who's the nephew of, yes, that Napoleon Bonaparte. He's going to be the first elected president of France, and he is going to overthrow his own government in 1851, and he's going to, in 1852, become king. So he's going to become Emperor Bonaparte, but we'll cover that time period later. But France has a series of uprisings here. In 1830 against Charles X, a reactionary, and against Louis Philippe, a conservative, in the Revolution of 1848. The Crystal Palace and its symbolism, changing countries here, looking at Great Britain. This housed the Great Exhibition of 1851, which displayed almost 20,000 exhibits, mostly from Great Britain, but also from abroad. But it displayed the marvels of British technology, and it reflected British industrial might and British power, and it was a display of confidence in this industrial primacy of Great Britain. And why did British industry grow? Why was Britain really in the 1800s in the forefront of industrialization? A lot of things you could talk about here. The agricultural revolution freed up men from the land to go into the cities. You've got the prior commercial revolution, which capital accumulated in port cities through overseas trade long before the Industrial Revolution. You have in Great Britain an abundance of coal and iron. You have a good infrastructure of roads and canal building, connects areas of Great Britain. Further, you have easy access to the sea. You have no internal customs barriers. You have law protects property rights. You have a limited government which provided political stability, and you have this growing overseas empire. So a lot of things, and then you, of course, you have innovation, and you could talk about some of these inventors. You can go back to the agricultural revolution, talked about people like Jethro Tull. You could talk about James Watt and some of the textile inventions which furthered the growth of the textile industry. James Watt, remember, he is the perfecter really here of the steam engine, and this steam engine is used to pump water out of deep mine shafts in mines for iron and for coal. It's used to power factories. It's used to move ships and eventually to move trains. And why this British political freedom and stability? A lot of this precedes the time period we're looking at here after Napoleon. You have, if you remember from earlier, the Petition of Right, the Bill of Rights, the Habeas Corpus Act. You have in 1832, you have a Reform Act which increases the franchise, the amount of people voting in Great Britain. You have the repeal in 1846 of the Corn Laws, making grain cheaper for the poor. in urban areas. So compared to much of Europe, Great Britain has much more political freedom and participation. Be sure to be able to discuss some of these isms here, particularly these 6 here: conservatism, liberalism, socialism, nationalism, romanticism, and feminism. I'll just make a nod to another video, which is a good one by Tom Ritchie. He actually has a chart, and he'd take you through it if you went to his, I think it's called 19th Century Isms, but I won't go into great detail here. But conservatism refers to the support of tradition, the support of the church, the protection of privilege. It's a little bit going back to the status quo before the French Revolution, although those who want to dial the clock way back and get rid of any participation, any parliament, those are reactionaries like Charles X or like the Tsar up in Russia. But we associate conservatism with the aristocracy, mostly wealthy land owners, this rural elite. Conservatism is also associated with Metternich and this Congress of Vienna and Concert of Europe, which worked to keep stability, to keep a balance in power in post-Napoleonic Europe. In contrast here is liberalism, and liberalism is what I think are the two main definitions of liberalism is the desire for limited government and for individual freedom. But by limited government, basically that means more participation of others. Some want a constitutional monarchy, perhaps. Others want a republic, which is a government without a king. But limited government and greater individual freedom. Strongest really here in the middle class. There is a historian out at UCLA, Eugene Weber, who in his series of videos, he says that the history of modern Europe is a history of the rise of the middle class, which is this group which is aggressive and it's ambitious and it is educated, it's increasingly prosperous, and it's being shut out by the aristocrats and the monarchs who basically are taking care of each other and not sharing power and privilege and patronage. Anyhow, the liberals are largely associated with the middle class, and they're not necessarily sympathetic to the anti-property radicals, the growing socialist Marxists in Western Europe. Socialism is this idea of replacing an economic system of competition with a system of cooperation. They want to reorder society. And you have the earlier group of the utopian socialists who've got these dreams of people working multiple jobs and having some sort of meritocratic government rearranging society. And then you have Karl Marx, who's the better known, and he claims that his reading of history is scientific, that the utopians, in fact that's an insult from the Marxists, that he wants, Marx is looking for government ownership of the means of production. And the means of production are things like things that produce wealth, namely factories, but also banks and railroads and farms and ports and things like that. The socialists are aiming at the working class, but when we continue on in our study of history here, the socialists are largely led by middle-class ideologues, and case in point would be Marx and his sidekick Friedrich Engels. Nationalism has as its goal the strengthening of an existing nation or the creation of a independent and united nation where there is not one. Think of Germany and all the dozens of smaller German states. Think of Italy, likewise divided into fragments. Think of Ireland under the thumb of Great Britain, or Poland, which has been divided earlier between Russia, Prussia, and Germany. Or think of Hungary, which is controlled by the Habsburg dynasty under really an Austrian monarch at this point. Romanticism is an artistic reaction against the Enlightenment. The focus is on feelings and on emotions, and it's often used in support of nationalism. The Romantics see culture as holding the aspirations of people who are under the boot of another country, and often these nationalist yearnings are expressed in songs and in music and other sorts of art. Feminism, the goal here is political equality and educational rights for women. And again, think of Mary Wollstonecraft and her vindication of the rights of women. Marxism, some terms to know. The Communist Manifesto is the game plan here outlining the call for revolution by an oppressed proletariat. Remember, the proletariat, we're not talking about the peasants out in so many farms around Europe. We're talking about this, the factory workers, the exploited urban workers. And the class struggle is this term that Karl Marx says defines the trajectory of history. He says history is a struggle between haves and have-nots. You've got kings and slaves, you've got lords and serfs, and now in the modern era you have the factory-owning bourgeoisie who are oppressing the poor exploited proletarian workers who are being called to rise up. They have nothing to lose but their chains. The Decembrist Revolt, 1825, you have a bunch of Russian officers who are rebelling against the succession of Nicholas I to the Tsarist throne, and they want liberalism. They want a constitutional monarchy. They want the abolition of serfdom. They want equality before the law. Many of these soldiers, many of these officers had been in Western Europe. Many of these are in the army that defeated Napoleon Bonaparte, but many of these spent time perhaps being corrupted or infected by the ideas of the French Revolution, and they want this for Russia, and the Decembrist Revolt is crushed. As you know, at this time period, there is no liberalism in Russia, no sharing power even in a limited way, which had happened in many of these other parts of Western Europe. Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo will end our looking here at the review sheet. Malthus's essay on principles of population, or the principle of population, says that abundance, economic abundance leads to population growth, not to the maintaining of a high standard of living. Or another way of saying this is that population growth always exceeds income, so the poor will always be threatened by poverty. And David Ricardo's iron law of wages, he says that when wages go up, the poor have more children. And when the population gets higher, wages go down, so poverty increases. So if wages go up, basically more babies, more competition, more suffering, more poverty. And both these guys give economics the nickname the dismal science. And these guys are basically going to be enlisted in arguments by conservatives that the best thing that the poor need to do is to morally behave, not waste their money drinking, be hardworking, and keep their nose clean, because there's really nothing the government can do to make things better. Poverty is inevitable. There you go. There's our drive-by review. Good luck. Study early. Study smart. For my class here, this is all stuff that will be on the test, so know it. Signing out.